friends, my name is Millie and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be bringing you my October reading wrap up. So I had a very successful reading month in October and I'm hoping that this video setup will work for this entire video because it is a new tripod that I've got, so hopefully it all works for this video because this is going to be a long video and I'm actually going to be standing up for the whole time. You can actually see my full shelves, see the overflowing nature of the shelves, which is why having a very good reading month in October was great because it means I got through a lot of books on my TBR and there's a lot of books on my TBR still. So we need more months like October. So let's get into the stats for the month first of all, because otherwise this is going to be a very long video if I ramble on anymore. So I read 21 books in total in October with a total of 7,802 pages read, which averages out to, I think it's 251 pages a day, which I definitely did not read that amount every single day. There were definitely some days when I read over, I think, like 600 pages a day, and then there were days when I did not read anything. So yeah, it kind of averages out to 250 pages-ish a day. In terms of the formats, 20 of the books that I read were traditional novels, one book was a graphic novel, which we will get to. 7 of the books that I read were part of a series or starting a series, whereas 14 of them were standalones. In terms of the age ranges, we had 11 adult books, 9 YA books, and then 1 middle grade book. Well, kind of middle grade, kind of YA, I would say, but I did class it as middle grade just to mix it up. And then in terms of the genres that I read, 3 of the books that I read were contemporary books, 9 books were fantasy, which is the largest category, largest genre, I guess, that I read from, as it always is. 1 of the books was historical, 3 of the books were horror, which is great considering it was spooky season. 1 book was paranormal, 2 were romances, and 2 were thrillers. So quite a good mix of genres there. More mixed than my reading months normally are, I would say. And also I love that we had like horror, thrillers and paranormal books getting in there, which is obviously fantastic because it was the spooky month, which I'm so sad is over because reading spooky books during October is like the highlight of my year. Like, I just love the vibes. Okay, and then in terms of the ratings, it was a pretty highly rated month, I want to say. I only had 1 2-star read. I did have 6 3-star reads, which isn't great, but I then had 4 3.5-star reads, 4 4-star reads, 2 4.5-star reads, and 4 5-star reads. So having 4 5-star reads in the month I think is really good. You know, there's been months in the year when I've really struggled to find any 5 stars, so having 4 5 stars, I'm so happy with that. There are also 2 books in this October reading wrap up that I'm not going to be talking about because I read them for the Waterstones Children's Book Prize, so I obviously won't be talking about those because no one knows what's on the long list yet, or on the short list, so I won't be talking about those. So we're only going to talk about 19 books in this wrap up. So let's get into the books that I read. I'm going to be talking about them in the order that I read them, which means that we are starting off with talking about Long Live Evil by Sarah Rees Brennan. So we didn't start off the month in a great place because I gave this 3 stars. However, I will be continuing with the series. So this is an adult fantasy book. It's Sarah Rees Brennan's first adult book as well. I believe she's written YA before, but I haven't read any of her previous works, so I don't know how her writing compares from her YA books to her adult book. This is following Ray, who is dying of cancer, and she is basically on her deathbed, and she is approached with an offer to be able to live. And the offer is to go into the world of her favourite book series, and that's what she does. She goes into this world of her favourite book series and she is no longer dying of cancer, but rather than being the kind of love interest or like the heroine of the story, she's actually the villain of the story. She is like the evil queen. The book series that she's gone into was all written anonymously, and you do get excerpts from that book series in this book, which was quite interesting. There's this emperor in there, and in the book series he's become the emperor. He's like, I don't know if he's killed people or saved people. I don't know if he's technically good or evil. I think he's meant to be good, but some of his actions I would say are not that good. But when she enters the story, he's not become the emperor yet. So she's kind of trying to make sure that the story goes along the way it should, except for the fact that for the story to go along the way it should, her character should be dead. So it's kind of unfolding in a way that she's not really expecting. And it was interesting the way, or like the concept, and it's silly, it's goofy, it's camp, it's fun, but I think I just wanted to enjoy it more than I ended up doing so. I think that a lot of the reason why I didn't end up enjoying this as much was because there's a lot of real world dialogue being brought into this kind of medieval fantasy setting, and you know, I do kind of get Rey is from our world, she's like a 19-year-old girl, whatever, but I was just like, why would you be saying those kinds of things? Like, surely you know that's going to bring suspicion to you. And also, it was kind of dialogue that I can't imagine anybody, even in the real world, actually saying out loud. Like, it was kind of like internet speak. You know, you had character saying AF out loud rather than, you know, what the AF would stand for. I don't think anyone would actually say the words AF out loud. Like, you just say what it stands for. The AF is only what you'd use in internet speak. Maybe that's just me, but I found it quite cringy. There's also a musical number in here that was bringing me physical pain to read. I don't think that you can really have a musical number in a book. Like, I know you would maybe have a musical number kind of like in a TV show or a film, but having it in a book was so physically cringeworthy that it actually did bring me pain to read. I did like the characters. They're all a bit unhinged. You never really know what they're going to do. My favourite character was the kind of like disgraced knight bodyguard. I thought he was really fun. And the ending did leave me very intrigued as to what's going to happen next. But I just really need the real world dialogue, the modern world dialogue to stop. Like, it just needs to not it be happening, please. The next book that I read was You're the Problem, It's You by Emma R. Alban, which is the second book in the Mischief and Matchmaking series, or duology, which is a duology of historical romances. So the first one was More Than a Best Friend, which was sapphic, and then this one was following I think it was one of the cousins of one of the girls in that book, and then like one of their friends. I'm pretty sure that was the relations. I can't remember exactly. But yeah, this is kind of just a follow-on from that one, which is basically just gay people in Regency era, which we love to see. So I gave this one 3.5 stars, and I think I ended up preferring this one to the first book. I'm not entirely sure why, I just feel like I did enjoy it more. There is some very heavy miscommunication in here in the beginning, but it kind of mostly adds to like the drama of this book and this series. These books are very dramatic, they're very melodramatic, which is a lot of fun to read, especially with the historical setting. And I actually did find this one to be quite lovely. Like, the two characters, Bobby and James, go through some really great character growth, and I do feel like this one dealt with the kind of the homophobia that would exist at that time in a much more sensitive way, I want to say, because you do kind of have like that in the background. There's a whole blackmail plot going on, and I thought that kind of made the book feel a lot more realistic than More Than a Best Friend felt. More Than a Best Friend felt a bit more innocent and naive, I suppose, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I do think I just preferred the heavier tones to this one. And it really shows the importance of a strong support system. James doesn't really have any support system in this book, whereas Bobby does, and it was really interesting to kind of show the difference in how they dealt with what was going on in their lives due to having or not having a support system. And I'm excited to see what's going to come from this author. I feel like there's a lot of room for maybe like a modern romance from this author, but I had a good time. So yeah, if you're looking for like a fun historical romance, Regency era, but gay, I would pick this one up. I then had another 3.5 star read with The Blonde Dies First by Joelle Wellington. This is a YA horror, and it basically follows this group of friends, but we're reading from the perspective of Devon. Her twin sister is about to like graduate early, I believe, and so she wants to kind of have like the perfect last summer. So she has all these plans, she's told her friends all of these plans, their friend group, but then they go to a party, and at the party someone brings out an Ouija board, which never a good idea. Don't do an Ouija board, kids. Someone brings out an Ouija board and it ends up bringing through this demon. And Devon is at work one night and the demon attacks, and soon people start dying, and her and her friends kind of realise that people are dying in the order of the way that this film franchise in this world, like the characters would die in. So you have the blonde dies first, then the black guy, the jerk, the film nerd, the independent kid, and the final girl saves the day. I gave this 3.5 stars, and it was a lot of fun. It was very fast paced because these kids literally do not get a breather, but it did make for a very quick and easy read. So it's high stakes, you know, people are dying in here, but I do think the book is also very aware of how camp it is, as in, you know, how old horror movies are, and I found that a lot of fun. Despite the kind of fast pace, it was a pretty slow start. It doesn't really get going until like 70 pages in, so I would say persevere. If you're getting like 50 pages in and you're sort of like nothing's really happening, it does start to happen soon. The characters all felt really distinct, which I loved. I love it when the characters kind of feel like they could have just been plopped into the story. And there is plenty of twists, some of which were very predictable, but some of which did take me quite by surprise. And while I didn't really understand the explanation of everything at the end of the book, because it didn't really make sense, I think you just have to take the book not too seriously. Like, I think you just need to go in expecting a fun time and just have a fun time. It's, you know, it's like old horror movies. The explanations don't really make sense. They aren't very realistic, but they're fun, you know? I mean, I say that having not watched a horror movie in my life, but that's what I imagine they're like. I will say though, why did we spend so much time in this book talking about the main character's eyebrows? Like, it was a lot. I didn't count how many instances we talked about her eyebrows in this, but I should have, because it was a lot of time that was spent talking about her eyebrows. Like, at least 10 times, I want to say, we talked about the main character's eyebrows. It was just a lot, and it felt a bit random. But anyway, 3.5 stars. I then had my first 5-star read of the month with Where Sleeping Girls Lie by Farida Abike Aimide, and I love this. So this is a YA thriller, and you're following Sade, who has gone to this boarding school. On her very first night in the boarding school, her roommate goes missing, and everyone at the school seems kind of concerned for like the first week, but then something happens and everyone just kind of brushes it under the rug. But Sade and her roommate's best friend are absolutely convinced that something foul play has happened. But then Sade is kind of approached by the 3 most popular girls at the school, who are called like the Unholy Trinity or something like that. And eventually someone ends up dying. And you start off the book with a flashback to when this person has just died. And then I think with about 100 pages left to go, you are then past the flash forward, I meant to say before. And you then kind of don't really know what's going to happen. And I just found this so fascinating. I read the first like 400 pages in one sitting on a train journey, and I was just so completely in the story. I was so annoyed when I had to stop reading to get off the train. But I think my favourite thing about Farida's books is that the horror element is kind of something that can just happen in everyday life, and does happen in everyday life. In her first book, Ace of Spades, it dealt with eugenics, and in this one it deals with sexual assault. That kind of whole thing of boys will be boys, you know, like that whole thing of, oh, you know, he's made a mistake, like, just, you know, don't let it ruin his life. It deals a lot with that, which I think is really interesting to include that kind of everyday element as the kind of horror thriller aspect to her stories. I think that makes a really interesting commentary. And this is quite slow paced, but it's so gripping. I was completely hooked. There's a lot of plot twists, there's big reveals, small reveals, there's anagrams going on in here, so you're very much along for a crazy ride with this. I felt like all the characters, from our main character Sade to like the secondary main characters of Baz and Persephone to even like the very minor characters, even just the teachers, they all felt so genuinely real. It was almost like reading a true crime story. I've never read any true crime, but I imagine that's what it's like, and it all just packed such punch. So I am very, very excited to see what's to come from this author. I would read literally anything that she writes. Amazing YA thrillers, honestly. I then had a 3-star read with Drown Me With Dreams by Gabby Burton. This is the second book in the Sing Me to Sleep duology, which is, the first book is like dealing with sirens, and I don't know if they're technically mermaids, but sirens and maybe mermaids. And it had a really fantastic sister relationship in the first book, but I didn't love the romance aspect, and I think that's why this one was a real struggle for me, and why I'm not going to be able to talk about it very much, because I'd forgotten a lot of what happened in the first book, which didn't help because I'd read it like over a year ago. Also, this book very much focuses more on the romance than the sister relationship. The sisters are very much separated for the vast majority of this book, and I was just like, why would you kind of get rid of like the strongest aspect of the first book? And this definitely didn't need to be a duology. It could have just been a standalone, like, but just a longer one. I didn't love it, I have to say. There's another kind of love interest almost introduced in this book, who had so much more chemistry with our main character than the original love interest, and I don't understand why we didn't go to this new one, because he was far better than whatever the other guy's name was. Anyway, it didn't. So yeah, I was just pretty disappointed in this book, and I don't really have anything more to say on it because I can't remember most of the first book, so I can't even really say how good of a sequel it was, apart from the fact that my favourite element of the first book was basically missing from the second book. I then had another 3-star read with Then Things Went Dark by B. Fitzgerald. This is B. Fitzgerald's first adult book and first adult thriller as well. She's written 2 YA Greek mythology books, which I'm still very excited to read, despite the fact that this was a 3-star read for me. And this one is a murder mystery. So in this one you have a reality TV show that's set on like a desert island. It's kind of like Love Island in the fact that there's, you know, a villa there, they're just being watched all the time, but there's nobody else on this island. There's no camera crew. All the cameras are operated by drones or like set in the walls or whatever. So it's literally just these 6 people on this island. And when it starts, none of these people are particularly popular, I want to say, but all of the reality TV show is live streamed 24 hours, so people get really invested in what is going on, and then eventually one of them dies. One of them is murdered, and no one is talking. There's no footage really of what happened of the murder. It was in like a secluded part of the island, and the day before the murder, the guy who got killed was the most hated man on television. Reading this book did feel like watching a bad reality TV show. You know what, I don't want to say bad reality TV show in terms of like the book was bad, more in terms of it's one of those horrific TV shows that you're just like, why am I watching this? All these people are so horrible, but you can't look away. And the premise really drew me in, especially with British reality TV show season being upon us, Big Brother, I'm a Celeb, Strictly, all of those. And I feel like it came out at the perfect time for, you know, to coincide with that. However, I really struggled to be invested in the story because I didn't like any of the characters in this. They were all horrible people, and especially the guy who died. By the time he died, I was just like, okay, I don't care who's killed him because he just needs to go. And I feel like that just made me not feel that invested in the mystery, in the thriller aspect. A lot of this book is set in the before the murder, so you're really kind of watching the episodes alongside the audience, I guess, and then at the end of each chapter you just have like 1 or 2 pages of the detectives questioning somebody, which meant it kind of felt more like a literary fiction than a thriller because you weren't really dealing with unpacking the mystery that much, I don't think. But I did find it really quick and easy to read, and I do think that B. Fitzgerald has promise as a thriller author, and I do really still want to read her Greek mythology books. I just don't think that this one was really for me necessarily. I then unfortunately had my one and only 2-star read of the month with Castle of the Cursed by Romina Garber. This one is, it's not historical, but it is set in Spain, and it felt like quite a historical setting because it's set in this like ancient Spanish castle. You're following the main character whose parents have died, and she's gone to live with her aunt in their ancestral family home, and then she comes across this boy with silver eyes, and he kind of says that he can help figure out what happened to her parents. But then the story just goes like expands crazily, considering the fact that it's under 300 pages. There was just way too much going on in this book. I did not understand everything that happened. The author clearly just had so many ideas and wanted to put them all in a book, but I really feel like some of them could have been saved for another book. Not all of them needed to be in this one book, and if you are going to include them all in this one book, I feel like you needed to write a lot more. Like, this was under 300 pages and it was just, there was too much going on. It's also set across less than 2 weeks, and the main character falls in love in that time, which, as you know, I despise insta-love. Literally, that and miscommunication, least favourite tropes. And so it all just happened way too fast, and with such a short time span, you don't really have any time for any tension to build, any kind of smaller, more sort of subtle moments to happen. And yeah, it wasn't for me. And there's also the last 3 lines of the book add in like another reveal, and I just feel like it was all a bit too much, and also quite unrealistic considering what had happened in the rest of the book with that reveal. So anyway, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that one, but someone might like it. It just wasn't really for me. I did then have my second 5-star read of the month with my very first T. Kingfisher book, Nettle Bone. So yeah, I gave this 5 stars. I absolutely loved this. It was right up my street. So you're following Mara, who is the 3rd born princess, daughter of a king, and her sisters have been married off to this kind of like monstrous prince. Well, the first one was married off, then died, and then the second one got married off to him. And Mara instead goes to live as a nun in a convent. She sees her sisters suffer for years at the hands of this prince, and eventually she realises that no one's gonna rescue them, so she needs to do it herself. So she comes up with a plan to find a grave witch in order to have the prince killed, but for her sister to obviously not be accused of murder because she'd be the first one that they'd look at. And along the way she kind of collects this ragtag group of friends. You have a dog made out of skeletons, you have a chicken possessed by a demon, a reluctant fairy godmother, and a strapping former knight, and the Grave Witch. And I just absolutely love this. It was so good. This is the kind of book, it doesn't take itself too seriously, while also at the same time dealing with quite heavy topics such as domestic abuse and miscarriages, but it just worked so well. The journey that this story takes you on is very different to what I was expecting, or to even what like the first 100 pages of the book would suggest that you're going to go on. I just adored it. It's a kind of darker, twisted version of a fairy tale. It feels very familiar, but it's, you know, it deals with these heavy topics, but it also has quite soft moments and elements of like found family and friendship, which I just loved so much. You've got really funny, genuine dialogue and characters that kind of like root themselves in your heart. Like the dog, especially the dog made out of skeletons, Bone Dog, I love him and I would do anything for him. You also have like a bit of a romance aspect, which I just loved. They were so cute, and I can just tell that T. Kingfisher is going to be a new favourite author of mine. It was amazing. It was kind of that rare, perfect 5-star read feeling. You don't get that much. Even if you do give a book 5 stars, it doesn't necessarily have that feeling that you get like in your chest, but this one gave me that, and yeah, I loved it so much. Then had a very different read with a romance, and that was The Break-Up Pact by Emma Lord, which I gave 3 stars, unfortunately. So this was Emma Lord's first adult book, first adult romance. She's written a lot of YA contemporary romances, which I've loved. I have read nearly all of them, I want to say, and enjoyed most of them, I feel like. I can't remember exactly what I've given them, but I've enjoyed a lot of her books. So you're following June and Levi, and June and Levi have both been kind of the victims of viral breakups. So June was broken up with on a reality TV show, and her like crying face became like a viral meme, whereas Levi was cheated on by his girlfriend with a megastar actor. So he went viral in a very different way because it was kind of like reported on by like all of the magazines, all of the newspapers, all of that kind of stuff. So they've both been through viral breakups and they've actually been friends since they were kids. June runs a tea shop in the town where she grew up that was originally owned by her sister, who has passed away, and Levi was her sister's best friend. And Levi has kind of come back to the town in order to write a book after the breakup. He works in finance, but his dream is to be an author. So he's kind of come back after this breakup, after this viral moment, to have a breather and to write his book. They haven't spoken to each other actually for 2 years since the sister's funeral, and they go for this race along the beach for like old time's sake, and they are pictured by a random person, I guess, and that goes viral. So they end up deciding to kind of take revenge on their exes in order also for June's tea shop to thrive and get money in so that she can keep it alive for her sister, and also kind of so that Levi can get back with his girlfriend. Obviously, you can kind of guess it's a romance, so you know what's going to happen with those two. It was very, very sweet, and I do think that Emma Lord's writing style does lend itself really well to adult romances. However, the miscommunication is rife in this book. It is off the scale. They are meant to be like really good friends. I know they haven't spoken for 2 years, but they're still meant to be really good friends, have known each other for ages, and they barely have a conversation. Like they just don't talk to each other, and it's so frustrating. A lot of it is down to June, who is the main character. She is extremely stubborn, and it was very difficult to read from. Even as someone who is quite stubborn myself, I found her very, very difficult to read from. I did like the sort of small town setting though, and the tea shop was adorable. It was really, really cute, and I feel like it also dealt with the topic of grief very well as well, and that kind of whole thing of, you know, wanting to keep the person who's passed away's memory alive, but also that kind of thing of having to live your own life. I felt like it dealt with that really well, so I would recommend, I guess, but it wasn't necessarily for me. The miscommunication was too much, but I would read another adult romance from Emma Lord if she were to bring one out, because I know I've loved her YA books. Maybe it was just this one that didn't really work for me. Then had another 3-star read with Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo. So this is the sequel to Ninth House, which I feel like I also gave 5 stars. I reread it recently, so I should know. I'm pretty sure I gave it 3 stars. This is a series that is basically like the epitome of dark academia. So you're set at Yale, and you have your main character Alex Stern, who is part of the secret society called Leaf, which basically like governs the other secret societies at Yale, and Alex can actually see ghosts, and normally in this world you would have to take a certain potion or something to be able to see greys, as they're called. And there is also her mentor Darlington, and they kind of uncover this like murder mystery aspect kind of thing going on. And in the first book it's also set between dual timelines, so you have in the present day when Darlington has disappeared, and you have a few months before when Alex is just getting started at the secret society, and they're kind of trying to track down Darlington. They're trying to work out what happened to him, and in this book you do find out what's happened, but then you also have more murders going on, and you have more of the sort of side characters from the first book are really more main characters in this book, which I really loved. I loved getting to know Pammy and Turner a lot more. I feel like that was a really nice element to include. I just didn't necessarily love like the execution of the plot. I didn't really understand by the end of it what had gone on. I love the characters and I love the premise, and of course Leigh Bardugo writes beautifully, as she always does. I just don't think the execution was quite for me, but there's got to be room for a third book after the end of this, so I would read that. I would read a third book, but I just don't. I'd have to look up a recap, because I don't want to reread Ninth House again and then have to reread this one again to read the third book, because there is so much that goes on in these books that if you leave a long time between installments like I did with Ninth House and Hellbent, you're going to have to reread them, or at least look up a recap, because there is so much that happens. The vibes are immaculate, as always. Dark academia vibes, Yale, secret societies, magic, demons, hell. The vibes are there. It just didn't love the execution, but maybe I'm just stupid. Maybe it was just me not understanding what was going on. I don't know. I then had a 3.5-star read with The Palace of Eros by Caro de Robertis, which is pretty much just a straight up retelling of the story of Psyche and Eros. It is gender bent, so Eros is gender fluid in this one, but it is basically just a retelling, like a straight up retelling of the story of Psyche and Eros. Like there's nothing new that happens in the book, which I feel like is why I didn't love it that much. I just didn't feel like surprised or taken by the story in any way. It wasn't really anything different to anything I'd read before. It was just the story of Psyche and Eros retold but sapphic, and Eros being gender fluid. It wasn't anything exciting or new, I felt like, so I was just kind of bored for a little bit, which sounds really bad. I feel like if you're not that familiar with Greek mythology, you would enjoy this a lot more than I have. I think I've just read so much Greek mythology stories and retellings that I just didn't feel like this did anything for me. This does have a very, very beautiful writing style to it. It's very poetic, very lyrical, although there were some elements to it that were quite clunky. It uses, and I don't know why it would use these terms, but it uses terms like woman husband and woman voice, and that kind of ruined the flow of this beautiful writing that we had going on. Like it was gorgeous writing apart from these clunky words. I was just like, why are we not just saying spouse or wife or partner or whatever? Like I know that's maybe more modern language, but it really did interrupt the flow for me to have like woman husband plopped into the sentence, so that's kind of strange. But if you haven't read many Greek mythology retellings and you're interested in the story of Psyche and Eros, I would recommend this. I feel like I was just a bit bored because it just didn't do anything new for me. Also, the weather outside is so miserable right now that I am hoping this video is not going to be too dull and dark, but hopefully it won't be, because obviously I'm not going to refilm it. But yeah, it's just absolutely miserable outside today, which is so depressing. I want the sunshine back. I'm not a dark evenings kind of gal. The next book that I read was a 4-star read, and that was If I Have to Be Haunted by Miranda Sun. I finally got around to reading this. This was the oldest book that I had on my NetGalley shelf. Obviously it expired last year. Yeah, I'd had this on my NetGalley shelf since July 2023, even though this came out in September 2023, so I'd only technically had the physical book for a year, but I felt like I'd had this to read for a much longer time, so I was so glad to finally get around to reading this. So you're following Kara, who can see ghosts, and her mother doesn't want her to. Her mother wants her to like reject that part of herself, kind of focus on school and stuff. And then one day Kara's rival classmate Zach ends up dead, and she can see his ghost. For some reason he's the only ghost that she can touch. He is a solid ghost, and she goes to her grandmother, who is also a ghost, and they kind of uncover that there's this whole myth surrounding this ancient serpent or snake or something creature that roams the earth, that when it bites you, you turn into a ghost and you have like 7 days to find an antidote before you become a ghost for real. Something along those lines. And I was expecting this to be a lot more like Cemetery Boys, which is also about trying to bring a ghost back to life. But this one kind of goes on a wild ride, which I wasn't expecting and which kind of threw me off a bit at first. But by the end I really enjoyed. They go on this adventure into this like kind of, it's called a liminal space, but it's kind of this like other world within our world. And you have various different like portals that take you to places. So they end up in like the trap of a cannibal. They end up in this like crazy nature world with these like hill beasts and stuff, and it was a lot of fun. It was way much more fun and adventure than I was expecting it to have. It's a very light-hearted read. I was engaged throughout, and I just love the characters. I love the dynamic between Kara and Zach. There's a bit of a rivalry going on, but eventually they kind of grow to trust each other, and I love that whole dynamic. And I also love that the story delves into like intergenerational trauma. However, Kara is separated from her mother and grandmother for most of this book, so I don't feel like we unpack that as sort of deeply or neatly, I guess, as we could have done. However, this story definitely leaves room for a sequel. There is an epilogue that I was so intrigued by. There's also kind of hints that her grandmother has had a lot more excitement in her life than Kara has ever known. So maybe we'll get a prequel, maybe we'll get a sequel. I hope we get another installment to this book anyway, because there's a lot of room for it, and I would definitely read another installment in this world. We then had another 5-star read with, of course, Percy Jackson and the Wrath of the Triple Goddess by Rick Riordan. There is no world where I don't give a Percy Jackson book 5 stars. I love Percy Jackson, I love this series, I love these characters, and this was obviously going to be a 5-star read for me. So in this kind of new trilogy in the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series, Percy is trying to get recommendation letters for college. So he needs to get 3 letters. In the first book, he got one. and this is the second book, and he's trying to get a recommendation letter from the goddess Hecate, and she says that the way she will give him a recommendation letter is if he pet sits for her for a week. Sounds pretty easy, right? Except for the fact that the pets are a hellhound and a polecat, both of which are actually humans who have been turned into animals by Hecate and then kept as pets. Everything's going fine, but then at some point disaster strikes. They end up with a giant goat, an exploded house, and 2 magical pets roaming New York City, and this was just so nostalgic and fun and funny as well. It was just so lovely. I've seen a lot of people talking about how like they didn't enjoy this because the stakes aren't really as high, like Percy isn't dying as much as he I guess is in the original series, but I love that this is actually kind of giving him a break. Like, Percy deserves a break. He doesn't deserve to be being nearly killed in every single book in the series, which he basically is in the first 5 books. So I love the fact that this series is a lot more low stakes. I think it's just really cute and charming, and it's just a series for the fans, really. Be back with these characters. It's, you know, being released alongside the TV show. I'm loving the TV show, and I would read 10 billion more books about Percy and Annabeth and Grover, and I just hope Riordan just keeps them coming. Okay, so in the first 5 books we had like Percy from when he was 12 up until he's 17, and obviously now he's trying to get into college. I would literally read Percy Jackson books set for like the whole rest of his life. Like, I want to see Percy at college. I want to see Percy getting married to Annabeth. I want to see Percy as a dad, as an old man, whatever. I would read all of the books about Percy Jackson and Annabeth and Grover, so keep him coming, Rick. I'll always be here to read them. I then read Gorse by Sam K. Horton, which was a 3-star read for me. I was really hoping to love this one a lot more than I did. It's pitched as The Bear and the Nightingale meets Poldark. It's set in 1700s Cornwall, and it's kind of about religion. So you have Pell, who is like the keeper, I guess. I think that's what it was called. And then you also have the Reverend Cleaver, who wants everyone to convert to Christianity. Pell obviously doesn't believe in Christianity because he can see all of these fae and folks and piskies and goblins and whatever. And Pell has this kind of like apprentice, Nancy, and because everyone is starting to believe in Christianity and not leaving offerings for the little folk creatures, things are starting to go very wrong. And I understand why this was pitched as like The Bear and the Nightingale kind of vibes. It's definitely got those vibes, and I really like that aspect, but I think it was wrong to pitch it as Poldark-esque, because the only Poldark thing about it is that it's set in Cornwall. Other than that, it's not Poldark at all. So I went into it, I think, with the wrong expectations. There's a very poetic, folkloric writing style that I enjoyed, and it's very slow paced, which I don't mind a slow paced book. However, I just feel like with this one we needed moments where it picked up a little bit just to keep you engaged, because I really struggled to stay engaged with this book. It's a very dark tale of faith versus folklore, which I found really interesting at times and also quite devastating at times to read as well. But I don't love books that deal with religion. I just don't feel like they really gel with me very well, so I struggled with that aspect of it. There's also definitely going to be another book in the series. I feel like it's definitely going to have a sequel, and I just feel like this would have functioned much better as a standalone if we'd wrapped everything up in one book. It's a very short book as well. It's like 290 pages, but if it had had another 100-ish pages, we could have wrapped up the whole story just in one, and I feel like that would have worked a lot better than having a more open ending. So I didn't love this book as much as I hoped I was going to, unfortunately. Then had another 5-star read, and my last 5-star read of the month actually, with Rewitched by Lucy Jane Wood. This is such a lovely story. So you're following Belle, or Belladonna Blackthorn, who is approaching her 30th birthday. She's a bookseller, and she's also a witch, and she doesn't really do anything with her witchy powers. Like, she kind of uses them for more mundane tasks like boiling the kettle or whatever, or choosing an outfit for the day. And then on her 30th birthday, she is told that she has to go to a trial by her coven in order to prove that she uses magic sufficiently enough in order to be able to keep it, or it will go back into the coven. And so obviously she's kind of panicking. She hasn't really done anything with her life with her magic since her 15th birthday when she got it. And she is told that there is a loophole for the month of October. Her birthday was on the 1st of October, and she's told that there's a loophole for the month of October where she can have a mentor and kind of learn the different aspects of magic, and if she completes them all, then she will get to keep her magic, which she really wants to do, but she just doesn't really want to like be a hero with it, if that makes sense. So she gets her mentor, and it's just a lovely story. It's cozy and heartwarming and very autumnal, very witchy, very bookish, and it is the absolute perfect book to read in spooky season around Halloween. It's literally the perfect vibes. I loved our main character Belle. I connected with her in a lot of ways, not only in the accuracy of what it's like to be a bookseller, because this was very accurate in what it's like to be a bookseller, but also in terms of the self-love aspect and kind of learning to accept yourself and all of that kind of thing. I felt like this book dealt with that so well, and that kind of whole thing of your life, I guess, not so necessarily turning out to what you'd imagined it to be when you were 15. When she first got her magic, she expected a very different life for herself, and I thought that was a really interesting thing to include in this book, because there's so much pressure, I think, to sort your life out in your 20s, and the fact that our main character doesn't really have her life sorted out by the time she's 30, I feel like was really nice to read. There is a romance in this book, but it's far from the main aspect, and I felt like that was really nice. It was just kind of in the background. I definitely loved that we really focused on Belle's love of herself and growing that, rather than a growing romance part to the book. There's also quite high stakes in here. Like, there's something that happens, and I kind of predicted it, but kind of didn't. Like, it happened in a very different way to what I was thinking was going to happen, which I really enjoyed. I'm really excited to see what Lucy Jane Wood brings out next. I know that the next book has just been announced. I don't know if it's set in this same world or with the same characters. It's called like Uncharmed or something, and I am so excited for that. I hope it has an equally stunning cover, because this cover is like one of my favourite covers I think I've ever seen. Like the cat, the vibes, the trees, and then the gorgeous sprayed edge with the cat as well. I love this edition, so hopefully the next one will be equally stunning. But yeah, I love this book, so I'm very, very excited to read what comes next from this author. I then read another T. Kingfisher book, which was a 4.5-star read for me, and that was The Hollow Places. This is definitely way more horror than fantasy. Nettle Bone is definitely way more fantasy. This one is way more horror. So you're following, is her name Cara as well, actually? I read a lot of books with characters called Cara this month for some reason. So you're following Cara, who is just gotten divorced, and she moves into her uncle's museum. So her uncle offers her a place to stay so she doesn't have to live with her mum, who she doesn't really get along that well with. So she goes to stay with her uncle, and he runs this museum of curiosities, I suppose. It's all very random things. It's known as the Wonder Museum. It's got like lots of taxidermy and lots of ancient carvings and things like that, and she also makes friends with this, I don't want to say he's old, is he old? I can't remember how old he is, with this guy who runs the coffee shop next door. And one day her uncle has to have knee surgery, so he goes to stay with his sister, Cara's mum, and Cara is going to run the museum for about a month. And they get this shipment in of items that have been sent by one of her uncle's contacts, and then the next day there is a vandalism in the museum, and a hole has been knocked through the drywall of one of the rooms. Cara and the guy from next door, Simon, go to investigate, and they realise that there is actually a corridor behind the drywall, which shouldn't be able to be there because this room is like on the top floor of the building. There shouldn't be anything on the other side of that wall. But they go into the corridor and they follow it along, and they find a room which shouldn't exist because it should just be over the street. And so they get very intrigued, and they end up going into this other world, which is filled with little islands that all have doors on them that lead to other bunkers, and there's all these willow trees and stuff, and this is very, very creepy. I was very unsettled throughout much of this, and I will never look at a willow tree in the same way again, that's for certain. I was just totally sucked into the story. I completely devoured it. Very, very creeped out for much of this. This is definitely a horror book, and I was quite scared for much of it, so I tried to read it all in one sitting so I knew what had happened. And I absolutely loved the characters of Cara and Simon. They brought a lot of comfort during the horrors of this book. This is also, despite being quite creepy, it's also silly at the same time, which shouldn't necessarily work, but really does. I think that really shows T. Kingfisher's writing style, is being able to bring humour in like these dark moments. And I feel like that's definitely why T. Kingfisher is fast becoming a favourite author of mine. And admittedly, the monsters are not the scariest part of this book, which I guess is kind of like why it's a 4.5 star read than a 5 star, because I don't feel like it was quite what it was meant to be. The scariest moments definitely go to the school bus scene. That was horrible. And also to that guy in the water, that was not nice either, but the actual monsters didn't scare me as much. I had such a good time reading this, and I cannot wait to read more from T. Kingfisher. I've got one more book of hers on my TBR, but I'm definitely going to be buying like all the ones that I can get my hands on. I love T. Kingfisher now. I then had a 4-star read with the only graphic novel that I read this month, which was The Sad Ghost Club Volume 1 by Liza Meddings, I feel like is how you say it, I don't know. This is a graphic novel that really talks about mental health through the metaphor of ghosts, which I loved. I felt like that was such a cute metaphor and a really accurate one. So you're following the main character, who I can't remember their name. They basically have depression and anxiety, and they have been invited to this party and they decide to go along, and there they see another ghost, and it's just such a sweet depiction of mental health and anxiety, depression, intrusive thoughts. I felt like it worked really well with this metaphor of ghosts, of, you know, being invisible and kind of feeling like you're floating your way through life and through the world and not really being noticed by anybody. But there's also a message of hope throughout, and I just really connected with this. So if you are looking for just a sweet, spooky graphic novel read to pick up, try The Sad Ghost Club. It was really, really lovely. I then had another 4-star read with my final physical book of the month, which was Lucy Undying. And can we please just have a moment for the cover? Because I am obsessed with this cover. Look at that. This is actually the ARC edition, which I was very kindly sent by Penguin Random House. Unfortunately, I did not get around to reading it before the book was actually published, but when Violet and I actually went to a cat cafe this month, Violet had done a little book haul before we met up, and she'd bought Lucy Undying, and I was like, okay, this is my sign, I need to just pick this book up now. So this is a Dracula retelling, and I haven't read the original Dracula, so I can't compare it to that in any way, in how good of a retelling or how accurate it is to the characters or anything like that. But I believe that our main character in this, Lucy Westenra, was a kind of side character or a secondary character in Dracula, but was kind of like a throwaway kind of character. But she was one of Dracula's very first victims, and this is her story. So you have kind of 3 timelines going on in here. You have flashbacks to Lucy's past, to when she was human and her falling in love with her governess, told through her diary entries. Then you have 2 perspectives in present day, but kind of set like a week apart from each other. So you have this client transcript, which is telling Lucy's story of when she was a like when she'd first turned, her story throughout the years of being a vampire, and then like a week after this client transcript, because she's talking to a therapist, so vampires go to therapy. So a week after that, you have the perspective of Iris, who is the heir to this, like, what are they called, to this health empire, which is very dodgy. Her mother has died, and she's gone to sort out this like family home in London, and there she discovers the diary of Lucy Westenra. You also have this kind of future perspective, which is told in second person, and you can kind of tell that it's probably going to be Dracula whose perspective that is. So there's a lot going on, but I really enjoyed this. I've seen a lot of people not having enjoyed it, and I feel like that's maybe because they've read the original Dracula and don't like how it was retold, but I can't compare it to Dracula because I haven't read it. I loved the slower pace of this and the kind of gothic, eerie atmosphere. Felt like it suited the story very, very well. And personally, I also don't understand any of the reviews that are saying that this is boring, because I was engaged throughout. I didn't find this boring at all, even though there's a lot going on and a lot of different perspectives and timelines and stuff. I felt like I was able to understand everything and felt like I was just really invested in the character of Lucy. And admittedly, I didn't understand everything that happened, particularly in the last 100 pages. It kind of goes a little bit off the rails, I guess is the right term. I just found myself devouring this story, no pun intended. I love when an author brings a female character who in the original story was kind of just a throwaway, and gives her a life and her own story, and I felt like Kirsten White did this really, really well. There were times when this dragged a little bit in the middle, and those last 100 pages were a bit wacky, but I had a good time with this. And if you're looking for, you know, a vampire story for spooky season, no, spooky season's over, I know, but for next spooky season, let's say, I'd pick up Lucy Undying. I had a really good time reading this one. Okay, and then the final book that I read was also a 4-star read, and that was This Fatal Kiss by Alicia Jasinska. I don't know if I've said that right. I'm very sorry if I haven't. So this is basically set in like 18th century Poland, and you're following 3 characters. The kind of main character, I guess, is Gisela, who is a rusalka. She's a drowned water nymph, is that right? Or water spirit? She was a girl who drowned and then has come back to life with this water spirit who meant to kind of like take revenge on men. And she's very funny because when she's talking to one of the other characters who is kind of like tracking her down, Kazik I think is his name, she's kind of going like, well, it's not my fault, it's just my nature, it's just like what I'm meant to do as this folklore creature. And she's very funny. I loved her. She was she was a joy to read from, honestly. And I love the just various different types of like Slavic folklore beings which mixed into this. You have like water goblins, and you have, there's something else, there's this creature, I don't know what they're called, but there's this creature that like takes on the skin of a human, and that was really, really creepy. I can't remember what they're called, but that was quite creepy actually, which made it quite perfect to end the spooky season with, even though it's not necessarily a spooky book. But Gisela basically has been told of this old wives' tale, I guess, that if she can get a kiss from a human boy, she will become human again. And so she kind of sets her sights on Alexei, who is one of Kazik's friends. And Kazik agrees to help her so that she will no longer be like terrorizing humans. So she will become human again. And they're very much enemies, but they have a great dynamic. And this book is actually polyamorous. So you have this relationship between Kazik, Gisela and Alexei, and I really liked the dynamics between all of them, but especially between Kazik and Gisela. There's kind of like cozy witch vibes going on in here. You've got like a summer festival and lots of really gorgeous food descriptions, but there's also quite a lot of heavy topics being dealt with, and I feel like it balanced the two really, really well. And I was shocked at one specific aspect in this. There's one plot twist that I was not expecting, and I was like, what's going on here? It was actually like giving me chills to think about. There were a lot of funny moments, as I said. I just really hope that there's gonna be a sequel to this, because the ending is very open-ended, and I feel like if you were to end it that way, I would be quite annoyed. There's a lot to unpack still in this story and in this world, so hopefully there will be a sequel of some description, but who knows. Yeah, those were the, I guess, 21 books, even though I only talked about 19 of them, that I read in October, and I had a really good reading month, so I'm very excited to be going into November with such a good reading month on my back, and hopefully I will love the books that I read in November just as much. Hopefully I'll have as many 5-star reads, who knows. So I feel like my November TBR should have already been posted, so you can go and see what I'm planning to read in November in that video. But this was really like my Spookoplathon reading month, so that was the readathon that was made by Becca and the Books, and I love that readathon, so I was very happy to actually participate in it this year with videos, so that was exciting. And I had a lot of spooky reads and a lot of 5-star reads, so I was very happy with what I've read this month. Let me know what your favourite read of October was, and if you've read any of the books that I read this month, what you thought of them. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you want it, and I will see you in another video soon. Bye!